Louis had always dreamed of having a beautiful pool in his backyard, a place where he could unwind after a busy day. And finally, he had it. His house, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was a peaceful escape from the hustle and bustle of daily life. The pool was his pride and joy, shining like a blue oasis under the sun, surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and colorful flowers. Louis had worked hard for everything he had, from his job to the little luxuries he allowed himself, and his pool was no exception. Each morning, Louis would take a moment to admire his backyard, feeling proud of what he had built. The water sparkled like a diamond, and the peacefulness of the yard gave him a sense of calm. After long hours at work, there was nothing better than coming home, diving into the cool water, and letting the stresses of the day melt away. But for Louis, the calm didn't always last. His peaceful neighborhood, which seemed so ideal, came with some challenges. One of those challenges was a woman named Karen, who lived just a few houses down. Karen had a reputation in the neighborhood for making rude and uncomfortable comments to anyone who wasn't like her, especially to Louis. Every time they crossed paths, she found a way to remind him that he didn't quite fit in. Louis had learned to let it go, trying his best to ignore Karen's hurtful words. He was a patient man, and he didn't want to cause drama. But there was one thing Louis would not tolerate: someone disrespecting his space. And that's exactly what happened one hot summer afternoon. It was a Saturday, and Louis had just finished a long week at work. He was looking forward to a relaxing swim in his pool. But as he walked into his backyard, he froze. There, sitting at the edge of his pool, was Karen. She was lounging in his chair, enjoying the sun as if she had every right to be there. Louis stood still, unsure of how to handle the situation. He had never expected Karen to invade his private space like this. His peaceful retreat was now interrupted by a woman who had no business being there. She didn't even seem to notice him at first, too caught up in her own world of relaxation. But when she finally looked up and saw him standing there, her expression shifted. It wasn't the look of surprise or guilt, it was more like she was daring him to say something. "Well, it's about time you showed up," Karen said with a sneer. "I've been waiting for you to get out of the way so I could use this." Louis's eyes narrowed. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The pool, which he had paid for and maintained with his own hands, was suddenly claimed by someone who had no right to it. But Karen wasn't just being rude, she was taking it a step further. Karen's attitude didn't stop at just using Louis's pool. As soon as she saw Louis standing there, trying to keep his calm, she opened her mouth and let out a string of hurtful words. "You people never know how to take care of nice things," she said, eyeing Louis with a condescending glare. "It's a surprise you even have a pool. People like you don't deserve them." Louis's chest tightened at her words. His hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. He'd heard racist comments from Karen before, but hearing them directed at something so personal, something he worked so hard for, stung deeply. Karen wasn't just insulting him, she was trying to strip him of his dignity. "I don't think you should be here," Louis said, trying to keep his composure. "This is my property, and I didn't invite you to use my pool." But Karen didn't care about what Louis had to say. She simply scoffed and shifted in the chair, crossing her arms. "Oh please, you think you deserve this? People like you don't have the right to enjoy luxury. Pools are for people who work hard, who actually belong in places like this." The words cut like a knife. But Louis refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool. He had dealt with people like Karen before, people who thought they were better than others because of their skin color, people who thought they had the right to belittle others just because of their prejudices. Louis took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "You need to leave my property," he said, his voice calm but firm. Karen wasn't having it. Instead of listening, she just laughed dismissively. "What are you going to do? Call the cops? You people always think you can get away with anything, don't you?" She stood up and walked closer to him, her voice growing louder. "You should just be happy I'm even letting you share this space. You should know your place." Louis felt his heart race. He had heard enough. He wasn't going to stand there and let Karen continue to spew hatred at him, not in his own backyard. But instead of reacting angrily, he forced himself to stay calm and think clearly. He was a man of principle, but Karen was pushing him to his limits. "Listen," he said, trying to keep the situation from escalating. "I'm asking you one last time to leave. You don't belong here." Karen crossed her arms defiantly. "You think you're in charge just because you have a pool? You don't own this neighborhood. People like me don't have to take orders from people like you." Louis clenched his jaw, struggling to hold back the wave of anger building inside him. He couldn't let her disrespect him like this, not in his own home. And yet, he knew he couldn't let his emotions control him either. He had to think of a way to handle this situation without letting Karen win. Louis had always been a patient man, but Karen was pushing him to his limit. For days now, she had been using his pool without permission, making insulting and racist remarks every time she came. Each time he tried to reason with her, she brushed him off, acting as if she had every right to be there. Louis had tried his best to stay calm and not escalate the situation. He didn't want to get into a fight. But after hearing her cruel words yet again, something inside him. Louis snapped. It wasn't just the insults, it was the way Karen acted, like she could walk all over him, like she could come into his space and disrespect him without any consequences. Louis had worked too hard for his home, his pool, his life, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that from him, especially not because of the color of his skin. Every time Karen said something racist, it felt like a small punch to his gut. And the last comment she made, about people like him not deserving a pool, was the one that made him realize something: this woman wasn't going to stop until she faced consequences for her actions. Louis was fed up. He could have called the police, but he knew it wouldn't solve anything. He didn't want to get into a shouting match or let the whole neighborhood watch a dramatic scene unfold. Instead, Louis decided he'd handle the situation differently, creatively. He remembered an old prank from his younger days that involved itch powder, a harmless but incredibly annoying substance. It was something that people used to sneak into someone's pool for a laugh. Louis thought about it for a moment, weighing the pros and cons. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dangerous. But it would send a strong message. As he stared at Karen, who was happily floating in the pool without a care in the world, Louis realized this was the perfect opportunity. He wasn't going to let Karen continue to disrespect him in his own backyard. This prank would be his way of showing her that there were consequences for acting this way. He quickly went inside his house and grabbed the small container of itch powder he had tucked away in a drawer for years. He didn't know why he had kept it all this time, but he was glad he had. Louis knew it would take only a small amount to make Karen's day a living nightmare. He walked back outside with the container hidden behind his back and quietly sprinkled the powder into the pool. It was done. All he had to do now was wait. At first, nothing happened. Karen continued to float on her inflatable ring, completely unaware that Louis had made a move. He watched her for a few moments, waiting for the magic to happen. And then, it began. At first, Karen seemed to be fidgeting a bit more than usual. She scratched her arm, then her neck, and looked around, clearly a little confused. Louis remained still, sitting on his patio chair, his eyes never leaving her. It wasn't long before Karen's movements became more frantic. She was now scratching her arms, her legs, even her back. She splashed around in the water, trying to shake the discomfort off, but it wasn't working. "What's going on with me?" Karen muttered to herself, pulling at her swimsuit straps, trying to get comfortable. But nothing worked. The itching was unbearable, spreading all over her body. It started on her arms and legs, then moved to her back, her stomach, and finally, even her face. Karen screamed in frustration, standing up in the shallow end of the pool. Her face was twisted in discomfort as she rubbed herself, trying to relieve the itching that wouldn't go away. She looked around, but Louis was still sitting quietly, watching her struggle. Her eyes widened when she realized something: she wasn't just itchy. She was really itchy. Her body was covered in red, irritated spots, and it seemed like no matter how hard she scratched, the feeling wouldn't go away. "Louis," she yelled, her voice rising with panic. "What did you do to me? Why am I itching like this?" Louis didn't react. He kept his cool, sitting back in his chair, sipping his drink as if he were just another person enjoying the summer day. He didn't even look at her. But he couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Karen had bullied him for weeks, and now, she was finally getting a taste of her own medicine. Karen's frantic calls for help only grew louder. She started splashing around in the pool, splattering water everywhere as she tried to find relief. She slapped at her arms, her neck, her legs, but the itching was only getting worse. "Call 911, she screamed, almost in tears. "Someone's poisoning me. I'm being attacked." Louis sighed, shaking his head. But he didn't feel guilty. This wasn't about hurting Karen, it was about teaching her a lesson. And now, with her calling 911, the situation was about to get even more interesting. Karen kept screaming, but Louis knew the prank had worked. The itch powder was doing its job. Soon, the authorities would arrive, and Karen would get exactly what she deserved. She had no idea what was coming next, but Louis did. The moment had arrived, and he wasn't going to let her walk away without understanding the consequences of treating people like dirt. As Karen's frustration grew, so did her desperation. The itching had become unbearable, and she was nearly in tears, scratching every part of her body. Her skin was red, irritated, and covered in hives. But the worst part was that nothing seemed to relieve the discomfort. She felt like she was losing control. In a panic, Karen grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice shook with anger as she screamed into the phone. "Help! Someone's trying to poison me. I don't know what they put in the pool, but I'm being attacked. Please, you've got to send someone." The dispatcher, a calm and professional voice, responded quickly. 911, what's your emergency? I'm in a pool, and I think someone put something in the water. Karen ranted, her words coming in a jumble. I've been swimming, and now I can't stop itching. My skin's breaking out, and I can't take it. I'm allergic or something. Okay, ma'am, calm down, the dispatcher said gently. Can you tell me where you are and what happened before the symptoms started? Karen started talking faster. I was at this man's house, Louis something, he's black, you know? And I was just using his pool, and suddenly, I started feeling itching all over. It's like something's in the water. I know it's him, he's the one who did this to me. The dispatcher paused, processing the information. All right, ma'am, I need to get a statement from the other person. Let's make sure we understand what's happening here. Stay on the line. Karen, clearly furious and still frantic, could barely keep her composure as she yelled into the phone. Hurry! I need help now. In the meantime, the dispatcher had already contacted local police. Within minutes, a squad car arrived at Louis's house. The officers got out of their vehicle, looking around and assessing the scene. They could hear Karen shouting from the pool area, so they approached cautiously. As soon as they walked up, the officers took note of Karen's red, blotchy skin and her erratic behavior. She was pacing around the pool, still scratching and swatting at herself. But now, her face was flushed with rage as she saw the police arriving. What's going on here, ma'am? One of the officers asked Karen, trying to get her to calm down. I'm being attacked. He did something to the pool. He poisoned me. I told you, I don't know what it is, but he did it on purpose. Karen's voice was shaky and desperate. The officer nodded, then turned to Louis, who was standing nearby, watching the situation unfold. He asked, Sir, what's your side of the story? Louis took a deep breath and explained calmly, I didn't put anything in the pool. I asked her to leave. She's been coming here uninvited for days, making rude and racist comments to me. I didn't do anything to her. The officers exchanged glances. The situation didn't add up. They knew Karen had been acting strange, but they needed to figure out the cause. One of the officers asked, "Ma'am, did you notice anything unusual about the pool water before you started feeling the itching?" Karen paused, suddenly unsure. No, I didn't. I just got in and then, oh God, it's everywhere," she wailed again, scratching herself furiously. The officers kept questioning her, noticing that the symptoms were matching up with something harmless but irritating. After a quick inspection of the pool, it became clear to the officers that Karen had been disrespecting Lewis's space for some time, and her behavior had caused the situation to escalate. Lewis had simply had enough and decided to handle it in his own way, without violence, to teach her a lesson. With the evidence and the officers' investigation, the situation started to make sense. Lewis had been patient, but Karen had been the one to escalate things by trespassing and insulting him. Karen's patience had finally run out, and the intense itching was making her lose control. As the officers continued to speak with Lewis, Karen's frustration reached a breaking point. Her face turned bright red with anger, and she started stomping around the pool area. "You're just going to let him get away with this?" Karen screamed at the officers. "He did this to me, and you're just going to let him get away with it because he's black?" Before the officers could react, Karen's rage boiled over. In a sudden fit of fury, she rushed toward Lewis, her hand flying through the air and landing a punch on his cheek. Lewis stumbled back slightly, but he didn't retaliate. He stayed calm, his face expressionless. The punch had been more of an impulsive outburst than anything else, but it was enough to make the officers spring into action. The officer who had been speaking with Lewis immediately moved to restrain Karen. "Ma'am, that's assault. You're under arrest," he said firmly. Karen's eyes went wide with shock. "What? No. You can't." But it was too late. The officer handcuffed her and escorted her away from the pool. She shouted and struggled, but the evidence of her racist behavior and the punch she'd thrown were clear. Lewis stood still, his face a picture of calm. The officers turned to him and gave him an apologetic look. "Sorry about the trouble, sir," one of them said. "We'll make sure everything is handled properly from here on out." As Karen was driven away in the squad car, the neighborhood residents began to gather around, whispering among themselves. Word had spread quickly about the incident, and many of them had seen Karen's rude behavior firsthand. What started as a small altercation between neighbors had now turned into a public spectacle, and Karen's reputation in the neighborhood was forever tarnished. People who had once been intimidated by her would now see her for what she truly was, a bully who thought she could get away with anything because of her race. For Lewis, the victory wasn't about humiliating Karen. It was about standing up for himself without resorting to violence. His calm demeanor and clever solution had worked. In the weeks that followed, Lewis's reputation in the neighborhood grew stronger. His actions, while unorthodox, were viewed as justified by many. People saw how he handled the situation with dignity and strength, while Karen's behavior was exposed for what it was: racism disguised as entitlement. Finally, Lewis was able to enjoy his pool again in peace. He had stood up for himself and showed that sometimes, the best way to handle injustice is with a calm mind and a little creativity. The neighborhood had learned a valuable lesson, and Lewis's quiet victory was a reminder that sometimes, justice doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be real.